My name is Diane Calloway, and I want to start by telling you the kind of person my sister is, because without that you will not understand how any of this was possible. Carolyn Calloway is 3 years older than me. She is the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately becomes the center of it, not through loudness or performance, but through a quality I can only describe as gravitational. People turn toward her the way plants turn toward light. They always have. Growing up, I watched it happen at every family dinner, every school event, every neighborhood gathering. Carolyn arrives and the room reorganizes itself around her, without anyone noticing that it has done so. I loved her for it when we were children. I genuinely did. There was something magnificent about my sister, something that made you proud just to stand beside her. She was clever and funny and generous in the way that beautiful people sometimes are when they have never had to fight for anything. She remembered birthdays. She brought food when people were unwell. She showed up. I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what she did to me was not the act of a cruel stranger. It was the act of someone I had trusted entirely for 31 years, with every significant thing in my life, including my daughter. Isla Rose Calloway is 7 years old now. She has red hair, which she inherited from our grandmother, and which she treats as a personal achievement. She has strong opinions about pasta shapes and a habit of correcting adults when they say things that are factually inaccurate, which happens more than adults would like to admit. She calls her collection of smooth stones her treasures and keeps them in a tin under her bed. She is ferociously, spectacularly, entirely herself. And for 14 months, my sister told everyone who would listen that Isla was hers. Not metaphorically. Not as a figure of speech. Not as an aunt who loved her niece so much she jokingly called her my girl. Carolyn told people, specific people who mattered, that she was Isla's mother, that I was the aunt, that the arrangement had always been this way, and that I had simply struggled to accept it. I did not find out for 14 months. And when I did find out, it was not because Carolyn confessed. It was not because someone in the family came to me with what they knew. It was because my daughter, who was 5 years old at the time, and had inherited not just my grandmother's red hair, but also my habit of saying exactly what was true regardless of the consequences, said something at a school event that unraveled everything in approximately 4 minutes. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the year Isla was born, and the year my life fell apart in 2 directions at once, and the year I made the mistake of letting my sister hold me together, not understanding yet what it would cost me to be held. I was 26 when Isla was born. I was 26 when Isla was born. I was not married. Her father, a man named Paul who I had been with for 2 years and who had seemed, right up until the moment I told him I was pregnant, like someone who intended to stay, left 4 months into the pregnancy. Not dramatically, not with a fight. He simply became less and less present until one day he was not present at all, and the space where he had been closed over like water, and that was that. I was alone. I was frightened. And Carolyn was there. Carolyn was there in the way that only Carolyn could be there. She came to every antenatal appointment. She sat in the waiting room with a book and a coffee, and her particular quality of calm that made everything feel manageable simply by proximity. She decorated the spare room in my flat as a nursery, not the way I would have done it, not the pale yellow I had been thinking about, but a soft sage green that was frankly better, and that I would never have chosen on my own. She bought the pram, not as a loan, not as something to be paid back, just bought it and had it delivered and assembled it herself in the hallway of my flat on a Saturday afternoon, while I sat on the sofa eating crackers and feeling enormous. When I went into labor at 2 a.m. on a Thursday in October, it was Carolyn I called. She was at my flat in 20 minutes. She drove me to the hospital. She sat with me for 11 hours. She held my hand during the parts that required hand-holding, and said nothing during the parts that required silence, and knew, without being told, which was which. When Isla arrived, Carolyn cried. Real tears. The kind that come without warning and without performance. She held my daughter first time and looked at her with an expression I recognized, because it was the same expression I had felt moving across my own face in the same moment. The expression of someone encountering something so entirely new and so entirely important that all previous experience becomes temporarily irrelevant. I thought that expression meant what I assumed it meant. Love. Uncomplicated, generous, anti-love. I was wrong about the uncomplicated part. The first months were hard in the way that first months always are, and harder than that because I was doing it alone. I was on maternity leave from my job at the council planning office, which meant I had enough money to manage, but not enough to feel comfortable. My flat was small. My sleep was non-existent. My mother, who lived 40 minutes away in Shrewsbury, came when she could, but she was working full-time and could not come as often as either of us would have liked. Carolyn came every day, sometimes twice. She would arrive in the morning with food, proper food, not the kind of food you order when you are exhausted, but the kind that requires actual cooking, and she would hold Isla while I ate and showered, and occasionally slept for an hour in the middle of the day with the particular, guilt-edged relief of a person who knows they need rest, and cannot quite allow themselves to have it without someone else holding the thing they are responsible for. I was grateful. I want to be very clear about that. Carolyn was saving me, one morning at a time, and I knew it, and I told her, and I meant it. What I did not know was what she was doing with the time I was not there. Carolyn had her own life. She lived in a house 15 minutes away with her partner Marcus, who was quiet and steady and kind in the uncomplicated way that quiet, steady people sometimes are. They had been together for 6 years. They did not have children. Carolyn had spoken about this occasionally. In the careful way she spoke about things that were difficult, not with grief exactly, but with a kind of managed distance, the way you speak about a door that is closed when you have not yet decided whether you are going to try the handle. I knew she wanted children. I had always known. I had simply assumed, the way you assume things about people you love, without examining the assumption too closely, that she was at peace with the timeline of her own life. I had not examined that assumption closely enough, because while I was sleeping in 1 hour, increments, and learning how to be a mother, and being held together by my sister's daily presence, Carolyn was telling people a story. A quiet story, told in pieces, to carefully selected people who did not know me well enough to question it. The story was this. Isla was hers. I did not find out from Carolyn. I did not find out from Marcus, who I later learned had known for months and had told Carolyn, twice, that what she was doing was going to end badly. I did not find out from my mother, who did not know. I did not find out from anyone in my immediate circle, because Carolyn had been careful, in the particular way that intelligent people are careful when they are doing something they know cannot withstand examination, to keep the two worlds separate. The people she told were not my people. They were hers, colleagues from her architecture firm, friends from the running club she had joined 2 years ago, the couple next door to her house who had moved in recently, and who had met her during the period when she was spending most of her time at my flat, and had therefore never met me at all. A woman named Judith from her book group who Carolyn had mentioned occasionally, and who I had never met and who had, it turned out, spent 14 months believing she was friends with a devoted single mother named Carolyn, who was raising her daughter Isla entirely alone. Judith was the one who told me, not intentionally, not with any understanding of what she was telling me or what it would mean. She told me the way people tell you things when they do not know the thing they are saying is a grenade. It was at a community fair in the park near Caroline's house. One of those summer Saturday events with stalls and face painting, and a brass band playing slightly too loud near the entrance. Caroline had brought Isla and me along. Isla was 5 by then, all red hair and strong opinions and the particular energy of a child who has recently discovered that the world is full of things to investigate. Caroline had gone to get drinks. I was standing with Isla near the face-painting queue when a woman appeared beside me, mid-40s, dark hair. The kind of person who smiles at strangers with genuine warmth, rather than social obligation. She looked at Isla. Then she looked at me with a pleasant, slightly uncertain expression. "You must be the sister," she said. I looked at her. "Sorry," she said, laughing slightly. "I am Judith. From Caroline's book group. She has told me so much about Isla. She is even more beautiful in person." I smiled. "Thank you," I said. Judith looked at Isla again. "She has Caroline's coloring around the eyes, doesn't she?" she said. "I always think you can see family in the eyes more than anywhere else." I kept my smile in place through what I can only describe as an act of significant muscular effort. "Caroline's coloring," I said. Judith nodded warmly. Such a testament to her, raising this one alone. "I know it has not been easy, but she never complains, does she? Just gets on with it. Isla is lucky to have such a dedicated mother." The brass band near the entrance launched into something loud and celebratory. Isla tugged my hand and asked if she could have her face painted as a ladybird. I said yes without looking down. I was looking at Judith, who was still smiling, who had no idea, who was simply a woman at a summer fair making pleasant conversation about a child she had heard about for over a year from a woman she trusted and had no reason to doubt. "Mother," she had said. Dedicated mother. I kept my face exactly where it was. Still, composed. The same face I had worn through Paul leaving and the sleepless months and every hard morning. I had navigated alone while my sister arrived with food, and held my daughter and told the world a story I had not been given the chance to read. "Judith," I said pleasantly, "will you excuse me for just one moment?" I picked up Isla and walked toward the drink stall, where Caroline was standing with 2 paper cups and her back to me. And I understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once like a light switched on in a dark room, that my sister had built an entire life around my daughter and had not told me a single word of it. I did not confront Caroline at the fair. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect, when they hear a story like this, that the moment of discovery is also the moment of confrontation. That is not what I did. What I did was walk up to my sister at the drink stall and take the paper cup she handed me and say, "Thank you," and stand beside her while Isla ran back to the face-painting queue and Judith drifted away toward another stall and the brass band continued its loud celebration of a summer afternoon that had just become something else entirely. I stood beside Caroline and I drank my lukewarm lemonade, and I watched my daughter queue for her ladybird face paint, and I said nothing. Because I needed to think. I have always been a person who needs to think before I speak. Not because I am slow, because I have learned, through enough experiences of saying the first thing that came to me, that the first thing is rarely the most useful thing. The first thing is usually the most emotional thing. It gives them the option of responding to how you feel rather than what they did. And I did not want to give Caroline that option. So I thought at the fair, watching Isla emerge from the face-painting chair, with a red and black ladybird covering most of her small face, shrieking with delight and demanding to see a mirror. I thought on the drive home, Isla asleep in her car seat in the back with her ladybird face pressed against the window. I thought after I had put Isla to bed and made myself tea, and sat at my kitchen table in the quiet flat that suddenly felt very different from the flat it had been that morning. I thought about 14 months. Caroline had been doing this for 14 months. Isla was 5 now. She had been 3 when it started, or at least 3 when Judith had entered Caroline's life and the story had begun. which meant it had been going on for nearly half of my daughter's life. I thought about the specific people Caroline had chosen to tell. Not my people. Hers. People who had no frame of reference, no prior knowledge, no reason to question. People who had met Caroline during the period when she was most present in Isla's life and had simply absorbed the narrative she offered because there was no competing narrative to consider. I thought about what she had told them. Raising this one alone, Judith had said. Such a testament to her. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I did something I had learned to do in the years since Paul left. In the years of doing difficult things without someone beside me to share the weight of them. I made a plan. The plan had 3 parts. The first part was information. I needed to understand the full extent of what Caroline had said, and to whom. I needed to know the shape of the thing before I could decide how to respond to it. Acting on partial information had never served me well, and it was not going to serve me now. The second part was evidence. Not because I was planning legal action. Not yet. Not at that point. But because I had learned, in the quiet practical way that single mothers learn things, that it is always better to have documentation you do not need than to need documentation you do not have. The third part was Caroline herself. That conversation was coming. I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. I was going to have it on my terms, at my time, with everything I needed already assembled. Caroline was the kind of person who could talk her way through almost anything. She was persuasive and composed, and she knew me well enough to know exactly which version of events would be most difficult for me to argue against. I was not going to give her the advantage of surprise. I finished my tea. I rinsed the cup. I checked on Isla, who was sleeping with one arm hanging off the side of the bed, and her ladybird face slightly smeared against the pillow. I took a photo of her. I do not know exactly why. It just felt important to document that moment. My daughter in her bed in my flat, with her treasures tin under the bed, and Gerald the rabbit on the floor where he always ended up by morning. Mine. Entirely and completely and documentably mine. Then I went to bed and I lay in the dark and I thought about my sister and I thought about Judith and I thought about the word mother said in a park on a summer afternoon by a woman who had no idea she was pulling a pin out of something. I did not sleep for a very long time. The information part of the plan took 1 week. I was methodical about it in the way I am methodical about everything that matters. I did not rush. I did not make assumptions. I followed each thread carefully, and I wrote down what I found in a notebook I kept in the drawer of my bedside table. Away from Isla. Away from the flat surfaces where things get picked up and looked at without thinking. I started with what I could find online. Caroline had a professional profile on the architecture firm's website. Standard enough. Name, photograph, project credits. Nothing personal. But she also had a personal account on a platform she used occasionally. Not frequently, but enough to have built a small presence over the previous 2 years. I had followed her on it. I had seen her posts. Photographs of buildings she admired, occasionally food, once a long caption about a running event she had completed. I had not looked closely enough. I went back through 2 years of posts. Methodically, starting from the most recent and working backward, and I found them. Not many. Caroline was too careful for many. But enough. A photograph of Isla at the park, 18 months ago, captioned with a single line. My whole world. No name. No clarifying context. Just the photograph and those 3 words and the quiet assumption that anyone reading it already knew what they meant. A photograph of Isla's birthday cake, 14 months ago. Isla was not in the photograph. Just the cake, pink and elaborate, with 5 candles. The caption read, 5 already. Time is ruthless. Below it, A comment from someone I did not recognize. She is so lucky to have you. And Caroline's reply, 2 words. We manage. We manage. Not she is lucky to have her mother. Not her mum made the cake. We manage. The reply of a woman who had carefully left a door open and was now holding it that way with one hand while appearing to do nothing at all. I kept going. There was a photograph from 9 months ago. Carolyn and Isla at what looked like a soft play center, both of them mid-laugh at something outside the frame. The caption was just a heart. But the comments below it included one from a woman whose profile identified her as a colleague at the architecture firm. Beautiful, you two are so alike. And Carolyn had liked the comment. Just liked it. Had not corrected it. Had not said anything at all. That was how she did it. I understood it now, sitting with the notebook on my lap and the evidence accumulating in a column on the page. She did not lie directly. Carolyn was too intelligent for direct lies, which are fragile things that break under the slightest pressure. She told partial truths and left spaces. She used photographs without context. She allowed comments to stand uncorrected. She replied with words that could mean multiple things and let the listener choose the meaning that fit the story they had already been given. It was, I had to admit in the privacy of my own mind, extraordinarily well constructed, which made it worse. Not better. Worse. Because a mistake is a mistake. A moment of poor judgment is a moment of poor judgment. What Carolyn had built over 14 months was not a mistake. It was architecture. And my sister was very good at architecture. I found 4 more posts over the following days. Each one the same careful pattern. Presence without claim. Implication without statement. A door held open with one hand while the other hand waved innocently at the sky. I wrote everything down. Screenshots saved to a folder on my phone, backed up to my email. The way Helen, my solicitor from the previous year's tenancy dispute, had taught me to preserve things. Date, time, caption, comments, everything in order. Everything labeled. By the end of the week I had a clear picture of what Carolyn had built, and roughly how she had built it. What I did not yet have was the full scope of who she had told, and what exactly she had said in the conversations that left no digital trace. For that I needed someone who had been in those conversations. For that I needed Judith. Finding Judith was not difficult. Caroline's book group met every 3rd Wednesday of the month at a pub called The Anchor on Bridgenorth Road. I knew this because Carolyn had mentioned it occasionally over the years in the way you mention recurring commitments casually, as part of the texture of a life being described rather than examined. I had never paid particular attention to it. It was simply one of Caroline's things, filed away in the part of my mind reserved for details that do not require action. It required action now. I did not go to the pub. I want to be clear about that. I was not interested in confronting Judith in a group setting, or in making a scene that would reach Carolyn before I was ready. What I did was considerably quieter than that. Judith had a profile on the same platform Carolyn used. I found it through Caroline's followers list. Dark hair, mid-40s, warm smile in her profile photograph, exactly as she had appeared at the fair. Her profile was more open than Caroline's, more personal. The kind of profile that belongs to someone who uses the platform genuinely, rather than carefully. I sent her a message. I thought about that message for a long time before I wrote it. I wrote 4 versions. The first was too emotional. The second was too formal. The third was too long. The fourth was this. Hello, Judith. My name is Diane. I think we met briefly at the community fair last Saturday. I am Caroline's sister. I wonder if you would be willing to meet me for a coffee this week. There is something I would like to talk to you about regarding Carolyn and my daughter Isla. I would be grateful for your discretion. Thank you. I read it back 3 times. Then I sent it. She replied within 2 hours. Of course. I wondered if I had said something wrong at the fair. You went very quiet. Name the place and time, and I will be there. We met on Thursday morning at a cafe on Claremont Street. Neutral ground, neither her territory nor mine. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with a coffee and an expression that sat somewhere between concern and curiosity. I sat down. I ordered tea, and I told her, as plainly and as calmly as I could, what I had understood from our conversation at the fair. I told her that Isla was my daughter, that I was her mother, that Carolyn was her aunt, that I had raised Isla alone since she was 4 months old, and that I had not, at any point, made any arrangement with Carolyn in which Caroline would present herself as Isla's mother to anyone. Judith listened without interrupting. Her coffee sat untouched in front of her. Her expression moved through several things I did not try to name. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Diane, I have known Carolyn for almost 2 years. She has never directly said to me that she is Isla's mother, but she has also never said she is not. And the way she speaks about Isla, the way she describes the mornings and the school runs and the difficult days, I assumed. We all assumed, because there was nothing to suggest otherwise and everything to suggest the opposite. I asked her what she meant by we all. She looked at her coffee. There are 7 of us in the book group, she said. And Caroline has spoken about Isla to all of us. And I believe she has spoken about her in a similar way to people at the firm. I do not know the exact numbers. But it is not a small thing, Diane. It has been consistent, and it has been convincing. And I'm sitting here right now feeling like someone who has been living inside a story that was not true. And I did not know it." I nodded. "That is exactly how I feel," I said. She looked at me. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I wrapped both hands around my tea. "I'm going to talk to my sister," I said. But first I needed to understand what she had told people, and how far it had gone. So thank you. This has been helpful." Judith reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. "For what it is worth," she said, "I am sorry. You should not have had to find out the way you did. At a fair. From a stranger. About your own daughter." I looked at the table. "No," I said. "I should not have. I called Carolyn that evening and asked her to come over on Saturday morning. I did not tell her why. I said I needed to talk to her about something, and that it was important, and that I would prefer to do it in person. Carolyn asked if everything was all right. I said yes, everything is fine, I just need to talk. She said of course, I will be there at 10. She did not push further. Carolyn rarely pushed when she sensed resistance. She had a quality of strategic patience that I had always admired, and was only now understanding in its full dimension. Saturday morning came. Isla was at my mother's house for the weekend. When Isla was in the room, part of me was always with her. That was simply how motherhood worked. And for this conversation I needed all of myself in one place. Caroline arrived at 10:05. She was wearing a light blue jacket and carrying a paper bag from the bakery 2 streets from her house. The one that made the almond croissants I had loved since we were children. She held it up when I opened the door. "Thought we could have breakfast," she said. I stood back and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. Caroline put the croissants on a plate. I made coffee. We moved around each other in the comfortable, practiced way of 2 people who have shared kitchens for most of their lives, and know without thinking where the other one is going to be. Then we sat down, and I put the notebook on the table between us. Caroline looked at it, then at me. Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not yet. Something more like alertness. The particular alertness of a person who has been expecting a conversation and is now recalibrating how soon it has arrived. I know about Judith, I said. I know about the book group. I know about the people at your firm. I know about the posts. I have screenshots of all of them. And I know that for at least 14 months you have been allowing people in your life to believe that Isla is your daughter. Carolyn was very still. I kept going. I am not here to shout at you, I said. I am not here to make accusations I cannot support. I am here because you are my sister, and because what you have done involves my daughter, and because I need to understand how this happened, and I need you to tell me the truth. Not a version of the truth, not the version that sounds most reasonable. The actual truth. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car passed. The coffee maker finished its cycle with a small hiss. Caroline looked at the notebook, then at the plate of croissants, then at the window, and then, finally, at me. And something happened that I had not expected. She did not deny it. She did not construct an explanation. She did not offer a reframing or a context or a carefully selected portion of events designed to make the thing sound like less than it was. She simply looked at me, and her face, the composed, gravitational, magnificent face that had reorganized rooms since we were children, came apart. Not dramatically. Carolyn did not do anything dramatically. But the composure went. The careful management of expression that she wore the way other people wore clothing, automatically, without thinking, simply went. And what was underneath it was something I had not seen on my sister's face in 31 years of knowing her. She looked lost. "Diane," she said. And then she stopped. And then she said it again. "Diane." As if my name was the only word she had, and she was not sure it was enough. It was not enough. We both knew that. But I waited. Because underneath the anger and the hurt, and the 14 months of something being done to me and my daughter without my knowledge, there was still, stubbornly and inconveniently, the 31 years of before. And I needed to hear what she was going to say. So I waited. And my sister, for the first time in either of our lives, did not know where to begin. Carolyn spoke for a long time. Not in the organized, structured way she usually spoke, where every sentence knew where it was going before it set off. She spoke the way people speak when they have been holding something for too long, and the holding has become its own kind of exhaustion. In fragments. In circles. Starting one thread and dropping it for another, and coming back to the first one pages later in the conversation, having said 3 other things in between. I let her. She told me about Marcus first. Marcus, who I had always thought of as quiet and steady and uncomplicated, had wanted children with a consistency and a depth that Caroline had spent 6 years managing and minimizing because she could not give him what he wanted and did not know how to say so. Not the way he wanted. There had been 2 pregnancies, both early, both lost before 12 weeks, both handled in the way Caroline handled difficult things, quietly and efficiently, and in a way that left very little room for the grief to breathe. She had not told me about either of them. I sat with that for a moment. My sister had lost 2 pregnancies and had not told me. She saw my face. "I know," she said. "I know I should have. She stopped. I did not know how to be the one who needed help. I have always been the one who gives it. I did not have a version of myself that knew how to sit down and say I'm not all right. I thought about all the mornings she had arrived at my flat with food and held Isla while I slept. I thought about the sage green nursery and the pram assembled in the hallway and the 11 hours in the hospital waiting room. I thought about what it might have cost her to do all of that in the year after her second loss, without saying a single word about it to anyone. She kept going. She told me that when Isla was born, something had happened to her that she did not have a word for. Not jealousy, not resentment, Something more complicated and less comfortable than either of those things. She had looked at my daughter and she had felt a love so immediate and so enormous that it had frightened her. And then she had felt, alongside it, a grief so specific and so sharp that she had not known what to do with it except keep moving. Keep showing up. Keep being useful. And somewhere in the keeping moving, she said, something had shifted. She did not decide, she said. She wanted me to understand that. She did not sit down one day and make a plan. It happened gradually, in the way that gradual things happen, one small accommodation at a time. Someone at the book group had asked about her family, and she had talked about Isla and had not corrected the assumption that followed. And then it had happened again with someone at the firm. And each time she had not corrected it, the not correcting became slightly easier, and the correction became slightly harder, until eventually she was so far inside the story that finding her way back out of it felt impossible. I am not telling you this as an excuse, she said. There is no version of this that makes me look like a reasonable person. I know that. I looked at her across the kitchen table. The croissants were untouched between us. The coffee had gone cold. Carolyn, I said, Isla is 5 years old. She goes to school. She has friends. She has teachers. She has a life that is documented and witnessed and real. Did you think about what would happen when those two worlds collided? Did you think about what would happen when someone who knew your version met someone who knew mine? She looked at the table. I think, she said quietly, that I did not let myself think about it. Because thinking about it would have meant stopping. And stopping would have meant losing the only thing that made the grief feel manageable. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bird landed on the garden wall and sat there for a moment and flew away. I looked at my sister, at the lost expression on the face that had always known exactly where it was going. And I felt, underneath everything else, underneath the anger and the hurt and the 14 months of it, something I had not expected to feel. I felt sorry for her, not instead of angry, both at once, which was, I was learning, how the most complicated things always felt. The conversation lasted 3 hours. By the end of it, the croissants were still untouched and the coffee was completely cold, and the light in the kitchen had shifted from the bright particular clarity of a Saturday morning to the softer, flatter quality of midday. And neither of us had moved from the table except once, when I got up to get water, and once when Carolyn did the same. We covered a great deal of ground in those 3 hours. I told her what I needed her to understand, not what I felt, though I told her that too. What I needed her to understand, specifically and without softening, was the nature of what she had done. She had taken something that belonged to my daughter. Not a possession. Something more foundational than that. She had taken the accurate story of where Isla came from, and who was responsible for her, and she had replaced it, in a selected circle of people, with a version that erased me. And she had done it while sitting at my kitchen table every morning and holding my daughter and telling me she was there for me. That is the part I need you to sit with, I told her. Not the grief. Not the losses. Those are real and they matter, and we are going to talk about them properly. You and I, in a different conversation. But right now, I need you to sit with the fact that you were in my home every day while this was happening. You held my daughter while this was happening. You looked me in the face while this was happening. And you said nothing. Carolyn said nothing now either. Which was, in its own way, an answer. I told her what I was going to do. I was not, I said, going to involve solicitors at this stage. I was not going to contact the people she had told and correct the record myself. Both of those things would cause a kind of damage that Isla would eventually be old enough to feel, and I was not willing to do that to my daughter to satisfy my own need for justice, however legitimate that need was. What I was going to do was this. Carolyn was going to contact, personally and directly, every person she had misled. Not with a mass message. Not with a vague clarification. With individual, specific, honest conversations in which she explained what she had actually said and what the truth actually was. She was going to do this within 30 days. She was going to tell me when each conversation had happened. And she was going to do it without framing it in a way that made herself sympathetic, or me incidental. Carolyn looked at the table. "That is going to be very difficult," she said. "I know," I said. It was also very difficult to sit at a community fair and hear a stranger describe my daughter's mother and realize she was not talking about me. She flinched. Good. I needed her to flinch. Not out of cruelty, because flinching meant she understood the weight of it, and understanding the weight of it was the only foundation on which anything real could be built afterward. "There is something else," I said. She looked up. "Marcus," I said, "does he know the full extent of what you told people?" She was quiet for a moment. "He knows I spoke about Isla to people at the firm," she said. "He did not know about the book group. He did not know how far it had gone. He told me twice to stop. I told him I would." "And did you?" Another pause. "Not immediately," she said. I nodded. "You need to tell him the full truth," I said. "Not the version that is easiest to say all of it. And you need to talk to someone, Carolyn. A professional. Not because I am telling you to, but because you have been carrying 2 losses and a grief that has made you capable of something I would not have believed you capable of 18 months ago. That does not happen in a healthy person. That happens in a person who has been quietly drowning and has not told anyone." She looked at the table for a long time. Then she looked at me. "Why are you being this measured about this?" she said. "I am devastated," I said. "I am just also your sister. And those 2 things have to exist at the same time, whether I want them to or not." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet, but she did not let them spill. That was Carolyn. Even now. Even here. She nodded. "I will do everything you have asked," she said. "I know you will," I said. And I meant it. That was the complicated part. I was furious, and I was hurt. And I was sitting across from someone who had done something I was still fully processing. And I also knew, with the bone-deep certainty of 31 years, that Carolyn Calloway, when she said she would do something, did it. That had always been true. It was still true now. It was just that this time, for the first time, I was the one directing where that certainty went. Carolyn did what she said she would do. I had not been certain she would, despite what I had told her. The knowing she would was something I had said as much for her as for myself, a way of holding the door open between us while everything on both sides of it was still smoking. But she did it. Every conversation, every person, within the 30 days I had given her. She told me about each one. Not in detail. I had not asked for detail, but she sent me a message after each conversation, brief and factual, the way you confirm an appointment or acknowledge a receipt. Spoke to Judith today. Spoke to the book group Wednesday evening. Spoke to Sarah and Tom at the firm. Each message arrived, and I read it, and I put my phone down, and I sat with whatever I felt about it, which was different each time and never simple. Judith sent me a message after her conversation with Carolyn. She said, "I wanted you to know that Carolyn was honest with me. Completely honest. It was clearly a very difficult conversation for her. She did not try to minimize or justify. She told me the truth, and she told me she was sorry. And she told me that Isla has a mother, and that mother is you. I thought you should know that she did it properly." I thanked Judith. I meant it. The 30 days ended on a Thursday. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook, and I went through the list of names I had compiled, and I confirmed, as best I could, that every person on it had been spoken to. There were 11 names in total. 11 people who had been living inside a story that was not true and who now knew the actual version. 11 was not a small number. I sat with that for a while. Then I made tea, and I went to check on Isla, who was asleep with her arm hanging off the side of the bed as always. And I stood in the doorway of her room and I looked at her in the dim light. And I thought about what she knew and what she did not know, and what she would eventually need to know when she was old enough to ask the questions that were waiting for her. Isla did not know what had happened. She was 5. The world of adult decisions and their consequences existed entirely outside her awareness, which was exactly where it should exist at 5. She knew that Auntie Carolyn loved her. She knew that sometimes grown-ups were sad about things they did not explain. She knew that her mother, meaning me, was the person who made her breakfast and brushed her hair, and knew where Gerald the rabbit was when he went missing, which was always under the left side of the sofa. Always. That was what she knew. That was enough for now. But there was a conversation I had not yet had. Not with Carolyn, not with Judith, not with any of the 11 names on my list. The conversation I had not yet had was with my mother. My mother, Patricia Calloway, was 63 years old and lived in Shrewsbury, and worked 3 days a week at a garden centre, and had raised Carolyn and me alone, after our father left when I was 8, and Carolyn was 11. She was a small, precise woman with strong opinions about punctuality, and very good instincts about people, instincts she had occasionally failed to apply to her own children, because loving someone and seeing them clearly are 2 different skills that do not always operate simultaneously. She did not know what Carolyn had done. I had not told her during the 30 days, because I had not wanted the conversation with my mother to happen before the corrections had been made. I did not want my mother carrying that information while Carolyn was still in the process of fixing what she had broken. It felt unfair to both of them. But the 30 days were done, and my mother deserved to know. I picked up my phone. I looked at her name in my contacts. Patricia Calloway, with the small photograph next to it that I had taken at Isla's 4th birthday. Her face mid-laugh at something Isla had done with the cake. I pressed call. "Diane," she said. "Is everything all right?" I took a breath. "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I need you to let me get to the end before you say anything." A pause. "That bad," she said. "That complicated," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right. I am listening." And I told her everything. My mother did not say anything for a long time after I finished. I had expected questions. I had expected the particular sharp intake of breath she made when something surprised her, the sound she had been making since we were children when the world presented her with something she had not accounted for. I had expected, if I am honest, some version of defense. Not of what Carolyn had done. My mother was too clear-eyed for that. But perhaps of Carolyn herself. The gentle repositioning that parents sometimes do when one child presents evidence against the other. The instinct to find the explanation that makes everyone salvageable. None of that came. What came was silence. Long and full and genuinely held. The silence of a person who has received information that requires real time to settle before anything useful can be said about it. Then she said, "How long have you known?" 5 weeks, I said. "And Caroline has spoken to everyone she misled." "Yes, and you are telling me now because it is done. Not because you needed my help while it was happening." I hesitated. "Yes," I said. Another silence. "You should have told me sooner," she said. "Not to interfere." I would not have interfered. But because I am your mother, and this happened to my granddaughter, and I deserved to know. She was right. I knew she was right the moment she said it. I had made a decision on her behalf. The same kind of decision that had been made on mine. And the symmetry of that sat uncomfortably in my chest. "You are right," I said. "I am sorry. She made a small sound. Not acceptance exactly. Acknowledgement. Then she said, "And Caroline? How is she?" I looked at the ceiling. That was my mother. 30 seconds after learning what Caroline had done, and she was asking how Caroline was. Not dismissing what had happened, not excusing it, but holding both things at once the way she had always held both things at once. The way she had spent our entire childhood, holding the complexity of two daughters who were entirely different people and loved them both without requiring them to be the same. "She is in a bad way," I said. "She is seeing someone. A therapist. She started 3 weeks ago." "Good," my mother said. "That is good." She paused. "Diane," she said, "what she did was wrong. I want to be very clear that I understand what she did. I'm not going to tell you it was understandable or that grief excuses it, because it does not. What she did was take something from you and from Isla and dress it up as love. And that is not love. That is need. And need wearing the costume of love is one of the most dangerous things there is." I sat with that sentence for a moment. "No," my mother said. "They do not. They just exist together, and you carry them both until one of them gets lighter. That is all you can do." I asked if she wanted to come and see us that weekend. She said she would be there Saturday morning. She arrived at 9:30, which for my mother was practically sleeping in. She brought food, the way she always brought food, and she sat at my kitchen table and she held Isla on her lap while Isla told her at length about ladybirds and Gerald the rabbit, and the correct pasta shape for different sauces, which was a subject Isla had recently developed strong opinions about. My mother listened to all of it with complete attention. She asked follow-up questions. She expressed appropriate amazement at the pasta shape theory. She let Isla show her the treasure's tin and examined each stone with the seriousness the occasion demanded. And at one point, while Isla was briefly distracted by something outside the window, my mother looked at me across the kitchen table and she said nothing. She just looked at me, with the expression she had been giving me for 31 years. The one that said, "I see you and you are all right. And I am here." I looked back at her. That was enough. For that morning, that was completely enough. The moment that changed everything came 3 weeks after my mother's visit. Not a document this time. Not a screenshot or a solicitor's letter or a conversation at a kitchen table. Something much smaller than any of those things and much larger than all of them put together. It came from Isla. Isla's school held a family afternoon every term. One of those events where parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles are invited in to look at the children's work on the walls and sit in small chairs designed for 5-year-olds and drink weak tea from paper cups while the children perform the particular pride of showing an adult something they have made. I went. My mother came with me. Caroline did not come, which was a decision I had made and communicated to her simply and without discussion. Not yet. That was all I said. Not yet. She had accepted it without argument. Isla's classroom was bright and warm and covered in artwork. Drawings of families, self-portraits in crayon, a project about homes that involved small models made from cardboard and paint, and what appeared to be an ambitious quantity of glitter. Isla found us the moment we walked in. She took my hand and my mother's hand simultaneously and pulled us toward the wall where her work was displayed with the urgency of someone who has been waiting all day to show you something important. Her family drawing was in the center of the wall. It was done in the way 5-year-olds draw families, figures that are more feeling than form, round heads and stick bodies and arms that extend directly from the sides of the head because torso placement is a skill that comes later. Each figure was carefully labeled in Isla's handwriting, which was large and uneven and absolutely determined. I stood in front of it and I read the labels. Granny Pat, Gerald, me, Mummy. That was it. 4 figures. Her grandmother, her rabbit, herself, and me. I stood in front of that drawing for a moment longer than I intended. Isla was looking up at me with the expression she wore when she had done something she was proud of, and was waiting for confirmation that the pride was warranted. "That is beautiful," I said. "And I meant it in more ways than one." "Mummy," she said, pointing at the figure she had labelled with that word. "That is you. I made your hair curly because you have curly hair." "I do have curly hair," I confirmed. "And that is Gerald," she said, pointing at the rabbit figure, who was roughly the same size as the human figures and had been given what appeared to be a crown. "Because Gerald is important." "Gerald is very important," I agreed. She looked at the drawing for a moment with the critical eye of an artist reviewing finished work. "I did not put Auntie Carolyn on it," she said. I looked at her. She continued, in the matter-of-fact way she said most things, the way that came from having not yet learned to soften observations for the comfort of the listener. "Because Auntie Caroline is my auntie," she said. "And Mrs. Pierce said to draw our family and the people who live with us and look after us every day. And that is you, Mummy." She said it the way she said everything. Simply, accurately, without drama or agenda or any awareness that the thing she was saying had weight beyond its immediate truth. "You are always there." I crouched down to her level. I looked at her face, the red hair and the serious eyes and the small determined jaw that was entirely her own. "You are right," I said. "I am always there." She nodded as if this confirmed something she had not doubted, but was glad to have officially established. Then she took my hand and pulled me toward the model houses because she wanted me to see the glitter, and I went with her, and I let her show me everything. And I did not look back at the drawing on the wall because I did not need to. I had already seen what mattered. 4 figures, carefully labelled, in the handwriting of a 5-year-old who knew, without anyone needing to tell her, exactly who her mother was. I told Caroline about the drawing that evening. Not because I wanted to hurt her. I want to be clear about that. I told her because I thought she needed to hear it. And because I believed, still, underneath everything, that the truth was more useful to Caroline than protection from it. That had always been true of her. She was a person who could absorb difficult things when they were given to her directly. It was the things that arrived sideways, the things that accumulated in the corners of her life without being named, that undid her. So I called her and I told her. I described the drawing, the 4 figures, the labels, what Isla had said about why Caroline was not on it. I told her word for word, as accurately as I could, because Isla's words deserved to be repeated accurately. They had been earned by 5 years of ordinary mornings and school runs and lost rabbits and pasture-shaped debates and every unremarkable Tuesday that was the actual substance of a life being built. "You are always there." Caroline was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said she knew. I asked what she meant. "She knew," Caroline said again. "She is 5 years old and she knew." I told myself it did not matter what I said to other adults, because Isla was too young to understand what was happening. But she understood. Not the adult version of it. Not the complicated version with the grief and the losses and the book group and the posts. The simple version. The version that 5-year-olds understand, because 5-year-olds have not yet learned to look past the simple version to find the complicated one underneath. She knew who was always there. "Yes," I said. Another long silence. "Diane," Caroline said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. "I went to see a solicitor last week," she said. "Not to contest anything. Not to make any claim. I went because I needed to understand from someone outside the situation what I had actually done. What the legal and ethical dimensions of it were. I needed to hear it from someone who did not love me, and therefore could not soften it. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. She told me, Carolyn continued. She was very clear. What I did falls into a category she described as identity misrepresentation involving a minor. It is not a criminal matter in the straightforward sense, but it is the kind of thing that, if it had continued and if it had reached Isla's school, or her medical records, or any official documentation, could have caused genuine legal complications for you as her mother. The figure she labelled Mummy. Did she make the hair curly? I smiled before I could stop myself. She did, I said. She said she made it curly because I have curly hair. Carolyn made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a cry, but was somewhere in the space between them where the most honest responses live. That sounds exactly like her, she said. It does, I agreed. We were quiet for a moment. The comfortable quiet this time, or the beginning of it. The first version of quiet between us in weeks that did not have something unresolved pressing against it from all sides. She is remarkable, Carolyn said. Your daughter is genuinely remarkable. I know, I said. You made her that way. I thought about that. She made herself that way, I said. I just made sure she had somewhere safe to do it. Carolyn was quiet again. Then she said, I am going to be better. Not just about this. About everything. The losses and Marcus and the things I did not say for too long. I am going to be better at being honest about what I need, instead of finding other ways to fill it. I believe you, I said. And I did. That was still the complicated part. Even now. Even after all of it. I believe my sister. 6 months passed. Not quietly exactly. Nothing in a life with a 5-year-old passes quietly. But steadily. The way things pass when the acute crisis is over, and what remains is the slower, less dramatic work of rebuilding what was damaged and deciding what to keep from the wreckage, and what to leave behind. Carolyn saw her therapist every week. She told me this not because I asked, but because she had decided, as part of becoming better at honesty, to tell me things without waiting to be asked. It was a small shift and a significant one. I noticed it every time. Marcus knew everything. The full version, not the managed one. He had taken it, by Caroline's account, with the quiet steadiness that was his defining quality, which is to say he had been very still for a very long time. And then he had said, we need to fix this together. And that had been that. They had started seeing a couples therapist. Also weekly. Also something Carolyn told me without being asked. The 11 people had been corrected. All of them. Judith had become, in the strange way that life sometimes arranges things, a tentative presence in my own life. We had met for coffee twice more since that first Thursday at the cafe on Claremont Street. She was warm and practical, and had a way of listening that made you feel accurately heard rather than politely processed. I did not know yet what she would become in the longer story of my life, but I was glad she was there. My mother came every other weekend. She sat at my kitchen table and listened to Isla's theories about pasta shapes and examined the treasures, tin, and let herself be corrected when she said something factually inaccurate, which Isla did with the same focused determination she brought to everything. And Carolyn came back into our lives slowly and carefully, and on terms that I set, and that she respected without complaint. Not every day. Not every day. Not the way she had come before, which I understood now, had been as much about her need as my own. Once a week, on Sunday afternoons, when Isla was home and awake and available to be herself in the presence of her aunt. The first Sunday was careful, both of us aware of the weight of it, moving around each other with a delicacy that was not our natural register. Isla was not careful. Isla was never careful. She launched herself at Carolyn, the moment she arrived with the complete physical confidence of a child who has not been told there is anything complicated about this relationship and therefore finds nothing complicated about it. Auntie Carolyn, she announced, I have a new stone for the treasures tin, and it is the best one yet. Carolyn crouched down to Isla's level and looked at the stone, which was grey and smooth, and by any objective measure extremely similar to the other 17 stones already in the tin, with an expression of genuine interest. That is remarkable, she said. Where did you find it? The park, Isla said. Near the big tree. I knew it was special because it was the right weight. Carolyn turned it over in her hand. You are absolutely right, she said. It is the right weight. Isla took it back with satisfaction and went to put it in the tin. And Carolyn stood up and looked at me, and something passed between us that did not need to be named. The acknowledgement of two people who have hurt each other and are trying, carefully and imperfectly, and without any guarantee of how it ends, to find their way back to something real. We had tea. Isla showed Carolyn her latest drawings. Carolyn admired each one with specific, genuine comments rather than general praise, which was the right instinct, and which Isla responded to immediately because children always know the difference. When Carolyn left that evening, she hugged me at the door. A real hug. The kind that lasts slightly longer than social obligation requires and means something because of that. I will see you next Sunday, she said. Yes, I said. She walked to her car. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. The evening was cool and still, and the street was quiet. And somewhere inside the flat, Isla was explaining to Gerald the rabbit the significance of the new stone in considerable and authoritative detail. I listened to her voice carrying through the flat, and I thought about the drawing on the classroom wall, the 4 figures, the careful labels, the curly hair. You were always there. I was. I always would be. That was the thing about being a mother. It was not a role you performed for an audience. It was not a story you told to selected people in carefully managed contexts. It was the Tuesday mornings and the lost rabbits and the pasta-shaped debates and the treasures, tin examined with seriousness, and the arms that went around you without warning when you needed them, and sometimes when you did not know you needed them until they were there. It was the thing you did when no one was watching. It was the thing Isla had always known. Isla is 7 now. She still has the treasures tin under her bed. 23 stones at last count, each one selected according to criteria that are entirely her own, and which she has never fully explained to anyone, including me, which I respect because a person's standards do not always require justification to be valid. Gerald the rabbit has been repaired twice. Once when his ear seam came apart, and once when Isla decided he needed what she called an upgrade, which involved a small piece of blue ribbon tied around his neck that she sourced herself from my sewing box without asking, which is also very Isla. She still corrects adults when they say things that are factually inaccurate. She has expanded this practice to include television presenters, which means watching the news with her is occasionally more educational than the news itself. She started a new school year in September. On the first day, she walked through the gate without looking back, which is the thing you work toward as a mother, and the thing that breaks your heart a little every time it happens anyway. I watched her go, and I thought, as I often think, about everything that happened when she was 5. About the community fair and the brass band and Judith saying dedicated mother with warm and complete sincerity. About the notebook and the screenshots and the coffee on Claremont Street. About Carolyn at my kitchen table with the composure gone from her face for the first time in 31 years. About my mother saying need wearing the costume of love and being exactly right. About the drawing on the classroom wall. I kept that drawing. It is in a folder in my desk drawer, behind the photographs and the school reports and the birthday cards she has made me over the years with the focused, artistic ambition of someone who takes creative work seriously, even at scale. The drawing is slightly crumpled at one corner from being carried home in Isla's bag. The figures are faded slightly from the particular wax crayons her school uses that do not hold their color perfectly over time. But the labels are still clear. Granny Pat, Gerald, me, Mummy. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember something. Not the complicated version of what happened. Not the 14 months in the book group and the corrections and the slow, careful rebuilding. The simple version. The version a 5-year-old understood without being told. You are always there. Carolyn and I are all right. Not the same as before. I do not think we will ever be the same as before, and I have stopped trying to want that because the before contained things that should not have been there, silences that were too long and needs that went unnamed, and a grief that dressed itself as love and caused damage before anyone understood what it was. What we are now is something different, more honest than before, more careful, more aware of the distance between what people show and what they carry. She comes on Sunday afternoons and she knows her place in Isla's life and she holds it with a consistency and a respect that has not wavered in 8 months. Isla loves her aunt, fully and without complication. The way children love people when the adults around them handle things well enough that the complications stay where they belong. Marcus and Carolyn are trying for another pregnancy. Carolyn told me this on a Sunday afternoon in October, sitting at my kitchen table while Isla was in the other room, engaged in an important conversation with Gerald. She told me plainly, and without the managed distance she used to use for difficult things. She told me she was frightened, and she told me she was hopeful, and she told me that this time she was not going to carry it alone. I told her I was glad. I meant it. My mother comes every other weekend. Judith and I have coffee once a month. I have been promoted at the council planning office, which means more responsibility and marginally better pay, and a great deal more spreadsheets, which suits me because I have always found something deeply satisfying about information that stays where you put it. Isla's hair is still red. She still sleeps with one arm hanging off the bed. She still knows where Gerald is when he goes missing, which is always, without exception, under the left side of the sofa. She knows her name. She knows her history. She knows who made her breakfast this morning and who will make it tomorrow, and who will be there on every ordinary Tuesday. That is the actual substance of a life being built and loved and documented and kept. She knows because it has always been true, and because when she was 5 years old, with a wax crayon in her hand, and a wall full of family drawings and a teacher who asked her to show the people who looked after her every day, she knew exactly whose face to draw. She drew mine. She always knew. That was hers. And it always will be.